I'm 28 years old, and this is the first time I have thought about this incident in detail because of how traumatizing it was. I met my ex-girlfriend in California in 2010. We had both lived there our whole lives, but decided to move to Maine a couple years after we started dating. She had flown to Maine on a business trip in 2012 and fell in love with everything about it. The small towns, the scenery, and the people. She came home and convinced me to pack up our lives and move there. So we did. We saved up a bunch of money and rented a huge moving truck. The plan was for me to drive the truck across the country while she stayed behind 3 days to finish her classes at the local community college, which were due to end at that time. I would have just waited until her classes were finished, but we decided to take advantage of an incredibly good deal we were offered from the company who provided the moving truck. She had a car she had to drive there anyways, while I towed my car behind the moving truck. My brother came with me on the trip. The drive was obviously a very long one, and when my brother and I arrived in Maine, about 4 days after we had left, we were exhausted. After unloading the truck and sleeping for about 16 hours, we decided to visit the small town of Belfast, which was 14 miles away from my new house. We ate some seafood at a little family-owned joint, rented a scary movie, and made the drive back. My new house was literally in the middle of nowhere. During the day, the view of the lake in my backyard was amazing. The woods surrounding my house were awesome, and everything was beautiful. At night, the house was incredibly creepy to be in. The whole house had windows completely surrounding it. You could not see anything looking out those windows at night, but I'm sure if you were standing outside, you could quite easily see in. My brother had a flight booked back to California the following day, and we woke up very early in the morning to drive to Portland, where the airport was. I eventually made it back, alone, and wasn't able to make any phone calls or watch any cable TV, because we had no service out there and no cable or internet hooked up yet. My cell phone did not work anywhere on that property. I had plenty of DVDs to watch, and that was it. When I made it back, I decided to try out my new fishing pole we had just bought in town. I wasn't out at the lake very long, as it started to get dark in Maine very quickly in autumn. I went back to the house and sat in the living room in a chair, looking out the windows at the scenery. My view was getting darker and darker. I turned on all the lights in the house and quickly became creeped out when it became pitch black outside. Imagine being in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night and looking around. You could not see your own hand if you held it in front of your face. When I say it was pitch black, I mean you can't see anything. I hadn't hung up any curtains or blinds yet, and I had the extremely uneasy feeling that somebody was outside my house, watching me inside, watching me go from room to room. And if they were out there, they could easily do just that. I decided to hang sheets up over all the windows using thumbtacks. I sat on the couch in the living room and put on a comedy movie to try and shake the unnerving feeling I had. It did not work. I eventually realized I had to try to get some sleep. I had a lot of work to do the next day, and my eyelids were becoming sore. I was getting very tired. I covered myself with blankets on the couch and turned off the TV. After a few minutes, my eyes had adjusted, and I could see around the living room very slightly. My eyes were very heavy, and I fell asleep. I woke up sometime later and it was still night and still dark. I reached for my bottle of Coke I had on the ground in front of me and took a big gulp. I set it back down and looked around the room. Now, I'm having difficulty putting these next emotions into words that I could accurately convey to you. My heart began throbbing when I noticed the man standing in the corner of the room. He was staring at me. I felt as if I was going to die from fright. I did nothing and said nothing, not by choice, but because I couldn't. I was frozen. He didn't move, and I was able to think logically for a moment. I'm not sure he knew I had seen him or was looking at him. I had a blanket over me, which might have shrouded my face in shadow, in which he wouldn't be able to see my eyes. After about a minute of gut-wrenching fear, I somehow decided to do something. This was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I coughed, but it wasn't a real cough. I did it while getting up, in an effort to give him the impression I did not know he was there. I slowly made it to my feet and walked across the icy cold wood flooring to the bathroom around the corner of the living room. He didn't move. I made it to the bathroom and nothing happened. I closed the bathroom door and slowly turned the lock to the upright position. Tears went down my face as I backed up into the bathtub behind me. I was staring at the door. I suddenly realized there was a small window up above the bathtub that I could most likely crawl through. I moved by the shower curtain and reached up to the window. I unlocked it and tried sliding it to the left to open it. The window began to squeak when I pulled it, and I froze, hoping the man didn't hear. Just then, I heard a tapping on the bathroom door. Not a knock, but a tap. And it didn't sound like the tap of fingers. It sounded like metal, like he was tapping a knife against the door. At this point, I made the realization that the man either knew what I was doing or simply wanted me to know he was outside the door. Adrenaline took over completely, and I slid the window open and pushed the screen out onto the ground. I tried not to exert any noise as I jumped up and began squeezing my body through the window. My head and upper body were out, and I could not see inside the bathroom, only the dense, dark woods in front of me. I was pulling my legs through the window when I felt the man grab my foot. Directly after that, before I could react, I felt my ankle be sliced open. I let out a noise of shock and surprise as I pulled out of his grasp and fell to the ground. I started heaving, and I felt as if my heart would explode. I stood up and looked around. I very quickly dashed out into the woods and fell to the ground, looking back at the house and the window to the bathroom. I felt down my leg to my ankle, which was throbbing from pain, and brought my hand up to reveal it covered in blood. The deathly serious situation I was in became real and horrifying. I looked back at the house and suddenly saw the back door fly open, and the man started gazing around the darkness surrounding me. He was searching for me. I became a statue on the ground and tried to control my breathing. He had a huge hunting knife in his right hand and was wearing all black. He walked down the back patio steps and started walking into the woods, but not near where I was laying. He was grunting, and soon after, I lost sight of him. I started frantically looking around, thinking he would at any moment spot me and stab me to death. I saw nothing but trees and darkness. There was a bit of snow on the ground from a couple days before, and I was freezing and shaking at this point uncontrollably. About 10 minutes later, I saw the man walk out of the trees from where he entered and go back into the house. I laid out there the rest of the night, and luckily, the sun started to rise only about an hour later. After the sun fully illuminated my surroundings, I felt as though the man had probably left, and I felt ready to move again. I arose to my feet and walked around the house to the front. I saw that the front door was opened completely. I slowly approached it and peered inside. Nothing. I walked in a few steps and very gently grabbed my car keys that were hanging on a hook by the door. I ran back to my car and unlocked it. I got inside and started the engine. I backed out of the long driveway and drove to the little general store a few miles from my house. This is where the story ends. I got away, and so did my visitor. My ankle was pretty badly cut, but healed after a few months with no problems. I suffered minor pneumonia from being outside for the time I had, but nothing too serious became of it. I later found out that an elderly man that lived about 2 miles down the road from me was murdered in his bedroom in the middle of the night. This experience took its toll on mine and my girlfriend's relationship, and I ended up moving back to California after a few months. The incident has made sleep very difficult to achieve, but writing this has, oddly enough, made me somewhat drowsy. I think maybe I'll attempt to go to sleep right now. Thanks for listening.
This happened to me 8 years ago, when I was 30 years old. I had just rented a new house with my family in a very nice neighborhood. We had just moved in about a month before I experienced this. I was in the habit of walking my dog every day at 6 p.m. as soon as I got home from work. I would take her out and we would always walk the same route. And one day, we had just started walking and we passed a neighbour's home. And then we witnessed something that we did not expect. As we were passing their driveway, I glanced at the front door, which was wide open. There was a man talking to 2 women, but he was crying uncontrollably. I felt very embarrassed, as you can imagine, and I walked by and saw one of the 2 women making eye contact with me. I looked away, but could easily hear the man sobbing and cursing. He was very upset about something, but I could not hear what the 2 women were saying at all, or any sound from them whatsoever. I of course kept walking with my dog, and soon after forgot all about it. But then a few days later, I got home from work quite late, around 8 p.m. As I was driving to turn into my driveway, I saw that there were police cars, fire trucks, and an ambulance parked outside of this house. I immediately thought of the other day, and thought for sure it must have been connected to what was going on. I pulled into my driveway and went into my home. My wife was cooking dinner, and my kid was playing. I wanted to walk by and get a better look at what had happened, and my wife said that she had no idea something was going on. So I quickly got my dog ready, and we went outside for our walk. As we were walking by the house, I saw several people rushed around. It looked like a scene from a movie or a TV show. I stopped for a moment and just watched. A man that was walking back to his police cruiser then spotted me and approached me. He questioned me a little bit, and I told him that I was living a few doors down and that I was concerned. We spoke for a little while, and when I actually came to ask what had happened, he told me something that I will never forget. He said that one of the women that lived there was brutally assaulted and murdered, whilst the other one was in critical condition at hospital. He saw that I was hearing this in shock, and then asked me to be on my way. But before I left, I told him what I had witnessed a few days earlier, and he told me not to worry, as they had now obtained the man who'd done this, as he himself had confessed. I resumed the walk in total disbelief. My wife was equally in shock when I told her when I returned home. I later saw on TV a picture of the woman who was killed. It was undeniably one of the women who I saw that day talking to the man. The news said that she was killed by her ex-boyfriend and had beaten her friend who had survived nearly to death. They eventually showed his picture as well, and I felt a bit sick when I clearly saw that it was the same guy crying that day.
This happened on Halloween night. It happened years ago in the wine country of California. Myself and 2 roommates lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-story house. Early in the evening, everything was normal. We passed out candy to trick-or-treaters, hung out together, watched a scary movie, and overall we were having a great time. There's always a feeling of creepiness that comes with Halloween night, especially if you just stay at home. You never really think something sinister or something terrifying will happen. After all the candy was gone and all the kids disappeared, our movie was nearing its end. We had all drank some wine and were getting very sleepy around midnight. We decided to call it a night and go to our separate rooms to go to sleep. I slept in the bedroom on the first floor, while my 2 roommates had the 2 bedrooms upstairs. At about 1 a.m., I awoke to a noise, accompanied by a feeling, a very bad feeling. I got out of bed and stood in my dark bedroom listening for the noise that awoke me to continue. For a moment, I thought maybe there was no noise, and that maybe I had dreamed it and had gotten out of bed for no reason. It took a few moments, but then I heard a muffled scream coming from upstairs. I heard scuffling and commotion coming from up there. I was very scared and decided I had to go see what was happening. Although in a situation like this in reality, selfishness takes over, and you really just want to hide or escape and be safe. I opened my bedroom door and took 3 steps out of my room. The stairs were a few feet away from my bedroom, and just as I had taken those steps, I heard somebody coming down the hall at the top of the stairs, and they were coming fast. They were coming right towards me. It was pitch black, and having only a second to decide my next action, I quickly but silently moved to the back sliding glass door and slid it open. While doing this, I felt as if somebody was going to grab me from behind, but they did not. I tiptoed backwards into the bushes in my backyard while staring at the back door, expecting somebody to walk out at any moment and see me, but nobody did. So I waited about 3 minutes, I'd say. I was terrified of what had just happened in the house, what was still happening. I did not want to go back in. Then the faces of my 2 roommates popped into my head. I had recalled earlier that night drinking with them and having fun, and I realized if they were in trouble, I needed to be brave. I needed to go back inside to help them. So I did. I slowly walked back towards the back door, and I crept back inside, and I immediately heard screaming that sounded like it was being muffled by blood. I heard gurgling noises. My heart was beating out of my chest as I climbed the stairs, unsure if somebody was still in my house or if they had gone. I came to my first roommate's bedroom and turned on the light. A very surreal feeling of this cannot be happening swept over me as I gazed at both of my roommates lying on the bed. One was silent. One was groaning in pain. There was blood all over the room. I did not know what to do. One of them was making noises, and the other was very clearly dead. I stepped into the room and almost slipped on the actual puddle of blood that was there on the ground. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. I was in shock. I grabbed my roommate's phone off her nightstand and dialed 911. I felt as if the intruder was still in the house and was going to approach me from behind. I kept turning around. I saw nothing. I told the operator that I needed an ambulance immediately and that my friends were dying. Ambulances and police were at my house in only a few minutes. My friend that was groaning, she died before the police arrived, and I never saw the intruder. For some reason, he skipped my bedroom that night and instead went upstairs. Went upstairs to murder both of my friends.
My grandfather once told me that he had met someone a long time ago overseas who had told him that she helped in the investigation of a murder of an entire family. The woman then told him that the family were murdered with a pickaxe of some kind, and the killer was never apprehended. My grandfather said the woman had told him that the father of the family, a few days prior, had told his co-workers that he had heard strange noises around this farm all the time, and that he had heard noises in the attic occasionally. The woman said that only days after this, a family member went to the family farm and found each and every one of them, including the maid, butchered. All the members of the family were brutally killed. One of the children, a girl, was found with strands of her own hair in her hand and had apparently ripped out her own hair whilst watching another member of her family be murdered, or while she was herself being killed. The woman had also told my grandfather that the killer, whoever they were, lived in the house for a couple of days after everyone had died. He took care of their animals and ate their food. Years later I researched this, and in fact found this to be completely true. My grandfather never mentioned where it happened or any names, but I'm sure he must have been referring to the unsolved murders of Hinterkaifeck.